Okay, I'll intro. I mean, obviously. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fuck Wellness. I'm Mallory.
I'm
Lara.
McKenna. Sorry, there we go.
Guys, come on.
I know. You heard our names. It's good.
I'm
we got
Lara, and that's McKenna. Okay.
Yeah. And we're all here for, I feel like, our first guest episode in quite a while, right?
So long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
It's been a minute.
Since masculinity?
Yeah, I think since November.
Wow. Oh my gosh, what a guest to come out of the gates with.
Truly appropriate.
Yeah. Also, I feel like one of our very early, like, Generation 3 girls supporters. So it feels very full
a
circle.
day one fan.
Yeah.
And supporter.
Yeah. Anyway, my friend, all of our friends, Gabby Granata is here to be a guest for our theme of a dialogue about diagnoses, which is a mouthful and you should try saying it 3 times fast. But I'm going to pass it over to Gabby to share a little bit about herself, anything that she wants the audience to know.
Yeah, super excited to be here. Yeah, this feels really full circle. I fangirled a little bit when I saw Mal's text about joining the podcast. So like, I feel like this is, I feel like I'm in like a new realm. So really excited.
You elevated, you ascended.
I've been thinking about you, Mallory, because I'm watching New Girl again with Ryan, and
Classic.
the episode where they try to go to the Prince party and Schmidt is like, this party is the thing. I feel like this is the thing for me, this podcast. So thank you. But yeah, I'm Gabby. I'm super excited to be here to talk about all this lovely stuff. I was diagnosed with ADHD about a year ago. So it's been, I hate being like, it's been a journey. But for lack of a better thought, it has. And yeah, so I'm excited to talk about how I got there. But yeah, with these 3 lovely ladies, I'm currently based in the great state of Pennsylvania. I'm a Pisces. It's Pisces season, so shout out to any of those people celebrating.
Shout out.
Your birthday is this week?
It is, yeah, which is exciting.
I literally just wrote your birthday note. It's on the table to mail to you.
I'm so excited.
Ooh.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's probably cooler things about me, but we can talk about that now. So love it.
You're a public health gal. You love public health.
Yes, love public health. I work in a nonprofit field. I focus on substance use and addiction, which I think is interesting. I've been thinking about that as we talk about this topic too, and I'm excited to get into it. But yeah, that's all my stuff.
Okay.
I feel like we need to add a few more notes about Gabby. Number one,
edits.
a few edits to your bio there.
Yeah, I feel like we have more to say about you.
Yeah. Such a creative person. Number 1. Yeah. I will just lead off with that. Number 2, an amazing facilitator of conversation. So very happy that she is here. And huge kudos for helping us so much with our kind of last round of book club. That was amazing. So yeah, those are my 3. You guys now have to add 3.
I mean, I feel like I could say 10,000 things about Gabby, but
FYI, words of affirmation are my love language, so I am thriving.
This is really good for you.
Yeah, this was my plan all along.
Yeah,
so.
We brought you on to talk, but actually we're just going to talk about how we like you.
Yes.
Everything you say, we'll have our own section to add on to it. Yeah. No, but Gabby's the best, so we're very glad she's here.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we could just kind of dive in. So I mean, I know we've talked a lot in the last year, so I feel like I've got to hear a little bit about your experience with getting diagnosed, how you felt about that, what you've learned. But maybe if you want to start even before getting diagnosed, like what were some, like, I don't even want to like symptoms, I guess, but were some things that made you think, okay, I feel like I need to get this checked out or I need to look further into this? Were there some catalysts, I guess, in that journey?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I'm always finding new ones. But I think like, I don't know, my whole life, it's always been a thing where I knew something was, I don't want to say off, right? But that there was something more that I needed to figure out. And like in high school, I had gone to see therapists and it was anxiety, it was depression. which, fun fact, often get diagnosed before ADHD and can be co-occurring. But I mean, if you're just treating that, right, like all the symptoms of ADHD, you're not treating those, and it cannot be so helpful. So had like gone through that experience and tried. I think the pandemic, though, was really the catalyst that got me looking into what was really going on. Without like the structure of work and being able to see all my friends, it was like really apparent. So I think that kicked it off. But yeah, like thinking about when I was young, like if someone had said to me a year and a half ago, like, oh, you definitely have ADHD, I would have been like, that's crazy. Like, I don't know. I don't do X or Y. Like, I think there's a very specific way that it's portrayed, either in media or, I mean, yeah, I guess mainly media. But as I talked to a doctor and like tried to look into those symptoms, like a lot of masking was going on, which I really didn't even notice. But yeah, I think between the pandemic and then putting the pieces together, like I at one point was sitting down, I have like a tub or two of like things from my childhood and like going through my old report cards and like looking at notes teachers had written. So I think going through that and also like hearing other people's experiences, social media was a huge help. And that was really what got me thinking like, oh, I do that. And I just thought I was quirky, or I'm a Pisces, or I don't know, the Myers-Briggs. Like I would always find something to attribute it to. And then it's like, nope, you just have ADHD. So yeah, I think it's been a big mix, but those are the top things.
How did this kind of diagnosis coincide with your job search, right? Because wasn't that happening around similar time? How did they like affect each other or make you think about searching for jobs differently?
That's a really interesting question. I started my new job in October and got the diagnosis in like January. So I don't think it didn't factor in, although when I started to think about medication, I feel like my like things from my job like really came up and I thought about that more. But yeah, no, I got to do that whole process first.
Wow.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Lara.
I was just gonna ask, like, what explicitly were the things that you were feeling that you were like, okay, this is like now a thing where I'm going to go to see a doctor? And then I'm also curious, like, take us through, like, so I'm going to the doctor, like, what does diagnosing ADHD look like?
Okay, so I should have had a notebook the whole time. What was the first question?
Of
course,
so
ADHD, everyone. Here we go. This is what it looks like.
Here we go.
Go ahead.
Let me remember 1 second. What was my first question?
What was the symptoms?
Yeah, symptoms and then process of diagnosing.
Yeah.
Okay,
like explicitly, cool. What were your symptoms for you that you were like, okay, I'm now going to go sit in a doctor's office? And then what did it look like once you were sitting in the doctor's office to go from like, hey doc, do you think I have this? Or what do you think is happening, to then having handed a diagnosis, an official one?
Got it. Okay, perfect. So, yeah, I think, like I said, little things, knew that something was going on, but I think with the pandemic, like, and there's not research, right? But there's been discussions about how like we've seen upticks in ADHD diagnoses because of social media and like being isolated, people connected that way. But I think I just thought I was like massively depressed and like I couldn't get off the couch, but my brain really wanted me to. And I was like, oh, this is normal. Everyone's going through this right now. And I had signed up for some like free conference and was listening to speakers, and I'll have to pull her name up, but there was one woman that was talking about like mental health and focus and all of these things. And she brought up being diagnosed with ADHD. And as she kept talking, I was like, I do that. And I do that too. And it was the idea of like, you're not just lazy, like your mind is always going. But like you can't connect the two, or motivation is a problem. And I talked to Mallory about like, not motivation, but productivity a lot, like leading up to those things too. And so the way she talked about it, I was like, maybe there's not something like I'm just not doing right. Like maybe there is something like functionally different about how my brain works. So like I started looking into it, and I read something about how the mind works, like it's always going. And I had a conversation with my boyfriend Ryan, who like opposite side of the spectrum is like one of the quietest people I know. And he said something about like, I don't know how you keep all that in your mind. And I was just like, don't you like constantly have background noise all of the time? And he was like, absolutely not. And I was like, I thought this was normal. So like little things like that going through. And then I started looking more and realized like a lot of the things I was experiencing lined up with ADHD. So looked into how one gets diagnosed. You have to go to a doctor. I had called my primary care physician, and like asked if they did that. And they said yes. So I went in, and to be honest, not a great experience. The doctor was basically like, well, why do you think you have ADHD? And as I was talking about like my approach to work and feeling like I couldn't get things done or having to take twice as long, she basically was like, well, you just don't want to do it. And that's why, and you don't have ADHD. And I was like, okay. And there was like only 2 questions she asked. I think it was like, can you sit through a movie? Was one. And I was like, yeah, if like, yeah, like I'm not going to get up. And I can't remember the second question, but she was like, yeah, you don't have it. And okay. So did some research, found like a doctor who I think themselves had ADHD and seemed like a bit more supportive. And it was like a two separate meetings virtually. They asked a bunch of questions, and then afterwards was like, yeah, you do, and these are the reasons why. Here's where you checked off. And she was pretty like medication positive, so she wasn't forcing it on me, but she was like, I think you should start. And I was like, okay, well, I have questions. And she was like, that's great. And we talked those out. But yeah, I'm glad I pursued it, but it made me feel really bad, because I was like, there's probably people who do go to a trusted provider who doesn't have the knowledge on this topic and gets turned away, and then like doesn't want to put themselves out there again. So I mean, definitely a lot of privilege in being able to recognize it, but yeah, finally it worked out, which is good.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I just went through this with Ryan, because Ryan just got re-diagnosed with ADHD, but there are the 2 types, the inattentive and hyperactive. And it feels like the first doctor, like those questions, like really like don't like, how would they even know based off of 2 questions? Like because those 2 types are pretty different. So anyway, I was just thinking about that too. It's like, feels like that's unhelpful to ask, like, do you get up during, or like, can you watch a movie? Well, like inattentive might be able to watch the movie, but they like sit there through it. The hyperactive may get up and like not, but it's like, anyway, that was just my first thought.
No, absolutely. Like it's broken up a lot, and there's also a lot of crossover. So something I've been looking at more is like autism and ADHD have a lot of overlaps. So there's definitely also been a time where I was like, what do I have? Because I can check a lot of boxes in all these different places. But yeah, I think mine was a lot more of like what was going on in my head and then affecting my work. I think when people think about ADHD, it's usually like a 5-year-old boy who can't sit still, who is like yelling and screaming and talking over people, and like, you know, classic bad behavior of children, I think is what it normally is just like categorized as. Where when I was talking through with the doctor, like she asked if I fidget or like get up and can't sit down. And I was like, well, not really. And she was like, okay, think about it a little bit more. And I was like, well, I do move my hands a lot, or like when my mouth is closed, like I'll not grind my teeth, but like move them up and down. And it's usually to the beat of how somebody else is talking. And like working through it with her, she was like, a lot of times, one, with women, it's also written off. But like you'll get punished for certain behaviors. And so you'll do it in different ways. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. So yeah, like connecting all those dots, like it looks different for everyone too, which is hard, but like trauma, family background, like it all plays into it and how it comes out. So I think there was a lot of like inner work I had to do to connect those dots.
I remember someone recently telling me that they would basically say that they were like having gray space in their head. I'd be like, what are you thinking about? I'd be like, I'm in the gray. And I'm like, you have like a pause in your in your internal mind. Like that is not something I experienced. So I think that's like an interesting comment that you had kind of mentioned earlier, but I don't have anything really necessarily to back up what I'm going to say right now, but it kind of seems like we're in this like culture of simultaneously overdiagnosing and underdiagnosing. And it's so bizarre to me how that's interacting with like certain populations of people, like probably severe underdiagnosing in women. And like even the example of like in our heads, when we think of ADHD, we think of usually a male and usually like a younger kid. And I think, I don't know, that's just like a really interesting thing to look at, because I talked about it on the podcast before, but I listened to this book, What Happened to You, by Dr. Perry, who like studies the brain, and then Oprah Winfrey. And they were talking about how all of these young boys who had experienced like tremendous amounts of trauma were just given ADHD like diagnosis, and that was like so far away from the root of what was actually happening. Or they like connected that, you know, in their classroom, they had a male teacher that wore the same cologne that their abusive father wore. And so they had like extreme outbursts of behavior, but the doctors were like, you know, they're inappropriate behavior, they have ADHD. Like it's just such a strange like time to be in. And as someone who, I hope it's okay to say, like is a very high functioning person, like you have a lot of goals, you've accomplished a lot, like you at the outside like maintain a very full life, you know, right. Like from someone looking in. And so I think that that's easy to write off, like a doctor would be like, well, you're checking all the boxes, like you should be fine, like you don't have this. And that gets into a whole conversation of like, why are we like shying away from, you know, helping people understand their brains a little bit better?
Right. And because right, you don't want to jump to something either. Like it's hard to meet people where they're at, and it's validating to get a name put to something. But yeah, no, it's interesting. Like to your earlier point about gray space, yeah, like never heard of that. And
yeah, not a friend of mine.
I wish though.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And like Ryan and I did like an exercise, and I was like, okay, I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking about for the next like 5 minutes. And I started going, and literally like 45 seconds in, he was like, please stop. Yeah. Like, I have a new understanding of you, and that's great, but like, please don't do that out loud anymore. And I was like, that's not what happens to you. And he was like, no. And it would never be a question I would think to ask. And like, you're right. Like I was high functioning. Like I think I was like top 5 of my high school class. I was in a lot of sports, like doing a lot of things. And I think even when I first connected the dots, I was like, well, this can't be me. And then when I thought of like when I went to college and I didn't have that structure anymore, and like I collapsed because it was all based on like my own ability to provide that for myself, I was like, oh, I must just be depressed. And again, connecting all the dots, it's like, no, your brain just works a little bit differently, and it's ADHD, and that's cool. But yeah, there's a lot of ways that it seems like something else for sure.
Yeah. In terms of like that funny thing that you did with Ryan, like that's hilarious. And I have had specifically men tell me before, like this comment or this phrase of like, I don't want to be a woman because of how your brains work. And because it's like a running, like, you know, internal thing, which obviously is a huge generalization. And it was mostly a comment on my brain, I think. But I do think that it's something that, I don't know, I think people think that, like,
absolutely,
that women think that way and hold all that information, and men don't as much.
I mean, I think I subscribe to that, right? I was like, well, I'm also a woman, so like these things, it makes sense that I do these things. Or like even being like over emotional can be linked to ADHD. And I was just like, oh, I thought I was just emotional, and I'm a woman. And like I grew up, my dad's like pretty traditional, and it always was like, why are you so emotional? And it's funny too now looking back, like I can see the familial connections to ADHD as well. And it's funny, like I don't know, I don't want to like diagnose anyone else, but like seeing certain people, I'm like, this all tracks and it's all connected. And yeah, but a lot of it I think got written off because of my gender too, both externally and then like internally.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say that I think back to the point of kind of the doctor being like, I don't know, you're fine. Like, you know, you've got a job, you're doing school, like whatever it was, like you don't have this thing that we think that looks a certain way. Like, it's just interesting because I think every single brain anywhere, like every brain is good at certain things, right? Like we all have different brains, we all are good at different things. And if your brain is like good at, you know, doing the gymnastics that it needs to be good at like a job or school or whatever, then it's like, oh, well, then like you're a-okay, just like leave, we're good, you know, because those are the things that are like valued in society, is those being good at those things. So weird.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you were talking about your hand movements, I was thinking a lot about how so many of your creative endeavors have to do with you moving your hands. And I was curious if you had thought about that a little bit, because I know at one point we had talked about how you oftentimes did your embroidery during meetings because it gave you something to do with your hands. And that was long before you got this ADHD diagnosis. So I'm curious if you've thought about that a little bit.
That's so funny. No. And I think too, like I'm Italian and I think stereotypically we talk with our hands and you can see it. And I usually try to hide them beneath the screen.
Don't hide them.
Whoosh. And I think it's all probably connected, but no, I didn't think about that. That's so funny. And I think now too, as I'm embracing it, like there's certain things I'm recognizing, like I can correct this, or I have to correct it in certain situations. And there's other things that I'm like, well, this is just a quirk about me. And like, as soon as we started the meeting, I grabbed a pen so that I could like fidget it in my hands and not feel weird. So yeah, that's really funny. No, I didn't think about it.
I do that as well. And I think that like some weird part of like Zoom becoming our new way of meeting with each other, it makes it okay to like have a pen and like not even think about it, because it's like we can't even see it. So like why would I even think about it? Or like having my crochet like when we're doing something else. Like it's just, I don't know, people can do what they need now. And it's kind of cool.
I also wanted to say that Gabby and my boyfriends are both named Ryan. So if it's confusing at all on this episode, they're both
need nicknames.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Lara.
I was just gonna ask Gabby if like when you did officially like know your diagnosis, was there any part of like what were your feelings? Was it like, oh, like a positive feeling that I now kind of have a name for something that's going on, or did it feel like any part of your identity was then different? Like because I feel like in many diagnoses sites when people get diagnosed like with things, sometimes it can really unsettle and shake up kind of the image that they have built for themselves.
Yeah, that's I think in some ways it was like yes and good, and then some ways it was rough. So I think like right off the bat it felt really validating, and I was like, okay, so like these things that I've noticed, it's not just like a moral failing on my part. Like there's work that can be done behaviorally, and there's medicine, and there's all these things. But I noticed a couple months later, and especially like in December, like around the 1 year mark, I think there was a lot of negative emotion. Like, okay, I've been taking this medicine. I know what it is. And like, I'm not further along like where I want to be. Like I want to have more of this figured out, which I think is how I was before I knew I had ADHD. Like I still get that way, but it was like this really down negative thing. So I think trying to figure out like, yeah, it was validating. There are things I can do now. Like I am much farther along than I probably would be without the diagnosis. So I think those parts were good. But then again, like reconciling like a more traditional family, like when I was in high school and I went to therapy, like I think I was at 2 sessions and my dad was like, okay, like when does it fix it? Like when does what you need to happen and when do you not have to go anymore? Exactly. And I was like, newsflash, never. So that is like, I think I was really nervous like about telling my parents, and like this is really the most formal. I've told a couple people, but now it's really out there, which we love. Yeah. So I think it was like, it brought up family trauma, but then it was validating, and it's still something I'm navigating, but a lot of feelings.
Yeah, it's new too. This is very fresh.
Absolutely.
I don't know how you felt with this, Gabby. We can talk a little bit about medication, but when I was diagnosed with anxiety, I was like, okay, this tracks. But then for me, getting on the medication part really felt like where it questioned my identity, where I was like, okay, I'm fine being a person with anxiety, but am I a person who takes medication like for a mental health thing? I think for me, that was almost a lot harder than just getting the diagnosis. And I think I had to work through a lot more around that. So I'm curious if it was pretty easy for you to transition from getting a diagnosis to medication, or kind of like what emotions came up around the medication part.
Yeah, I very much vibe with that. When I was in high school, got diagnosed with depression, they recommended medicine. And I remember even then being iffy about it. And I think part of it, I was like, well, I don't want to admit that I'm a depressed person. Like, that seems sad. And I was like, I talked with my mom, and like we geared up and we went to the doctor to get the prescription filled. And I don't know why I had to meet with them. I had to like go for a physical to get it approved. And I just remember her being like, you're so young, why are you on this medicine? And I was like, oh. So I think there was like some of that I was a little anxious about. When I had got the diagnosis, there was a couple people I like asked about it in my family, like ADHD, and some of the feedback wasn't, I don't want to say negative, but it was like, I don't know if I believe in that. And so I was a little bit nervous. But then there was this other part of me that's like, I can identify now so many things that are more difficult for me because of this new thing that I found out. Like, I might as well try medication and see if it helps, which thankfully it did. But I mean, even like the space that I work in, like I was having a conversation with a colleague today about mental health, and not that it's the only option, but right, like if you're in AA, like Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're going and you're talking about your journey, like there are groups that would say that you are not considered in recovery if you're on mental health medication. And I mean, like what I take is a stimulant, so it's definitely something that can be used not as prescribed. So I think there was a lot of thoughts about that. I got nervous, like, is it something I could, get too dependent on, and what happens then? And yeah, a lot of thoughts. But I think now, reflecting a year later, I feel mostly positive about it, given my experience.
When you got initially on medication, were you able to kind of stick with your initial one that was prescribed, or did you have to try out a few different kinds?
Yeah, I started on Adderall. That's what I'm still on. I think it's generic, which it is. It's like amphetamines. It's like says it on the label. Like, this is like probably if someone just saw it, right, they'd be like, what is going on? But yeah, I was pretty lucky. I'm still on the same brand, but the dosage has changed a bit. I've read about people having trouble or like it wearing off. I haven't really had that. But yeah, it stayed pretty consistent, which was good. It was like weird in the beginning. There were things like they recommended drinking a lot more water. I felt like really, really thirsty, but also like sweaty all the time. Like, until I figured it out, I think for like 6 weeks, I just smelled so bad. And I was like, I think I need to go to the doctor. And then I started looking and I was like, I just started a new medicine. Like, that's probably valid. If you watch Ted Lasso, it reminded me of when like the girl has to, I think she takes medicine and she has really bad breath, and they're like going and knocking on doors.
Yeah.
Like, that was what I felt like. Yeah. But yeah, once some of that stuff, like making sure I ate so I wasn't like feeling crabby. But yeah, I figured out all the kinks after like a month or two, and it's been good.
And how has the medication helped you? Like, what do you feel are the differences since you started taking it?
I think the biggest thing is motivation. And I was talking to somebody else who had taken Adderall like more recreationally, and I was asking them what it felt like for them, and they told me that they felt like God. And I thought it was really interesting because I was like, I just feel competent. Like, I feel like I don't have to try as hard. I feel like I'm just like everybody else now. And so like, it was such an interesting dynamic because I had read, even there was a woman online who was talking about how like a bunch of her friends, they went to a concert, someone was passing around Adderall, they all took it, and her friends were like freaking out. I think similar, like had that God-like feeling. And she was like, I feel like I could sit down and answer some emails or like respond to a few texts. And I was like, that's the thing, right? Like, it's not like I'm just like this pro now at everything. It's like, I can just do things that I don't want to say normal people, but people without ADHD just like do all the time. And it's not weird, where like, I can't even tell you how many text messages I still have that I don't respond to. And so, yeah, it just made me feel like I've always wanted to feel, or how I think everyone else feels, if that makes sense.
I'm just like happy that is the case. Like that is really, really good to hear. And I think, I don't know, I have like I'm trying to think of like a question related somehow to like actually, never mind. I don't want to answer that question. Next question is like, do you feel, because I know you said you've only like officially told a couple of people. Do you feel like having this diagnosis and this experience, has it kind of helped in, like, have you kind of found community in that? Or do you feel like that is something that, in time that might be created where you can like, have others that have similar experiences?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the biggest benefit was really the relationship with myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that made other things easier. And I was just like, yeah, I think places where I would feel really discouraged or really down and then pull away, it helped there. With the people I've told, I think everyone has been pretty supportive, and like I haven't told a lot of people, or it's people that kind of have to love me anyway. So that was good. But I do find myself looking more for those communities. Like I was exploring Discord and like joined all these groups, and but then in true fashion, like I would get really overwhelmed, and like it was a lot. So I don't think I've found the community yet, but I feel way more comfortable in spaces overall, which is really nice. But yeah, something I've thought a lot about, like I was looking for support groups. I've finally found a therapist that like specializes more so in ADHD, which was surprisingly very challenging. So things like that, yeah, have been good and somewhat accessible.
I kind of wanted to go back when you were touching on maybe explaining things to some of your family members. And in my experience, when I've come to some of my family members with things that I experienced or that I had or that I thought I had, the response was kind of always like, are you sure? Like, are you sure you just need XYZ thing? Or like,
Right.
are you sure that you don't, I don't know, like just kind of like minimizing it without meaning to, in a way, like, because I think for some reason it still feels like a bad thing to have a label on something,
or like a reflection of them and their parenting ability for some reason.
Yeah, or family dynamics. But it's interesting because I would come and I would say these things, and sometimes the response would be that, and then I'd be like, wait a second, but this family member has this and this one does this, and then like I could start naming them off and being like, it is not out of left field that I might also have a version of all of those things. And so
Absolutely.
I just think it's funny the way that like our society has progressed to a spot where it's like, I don't know, we have this younger generation of people who are like committing to understanding how their brains work for sometimes no other reason than that they want to know themselves better, or that they want to make life a little bit easier. And I don't know, I just think it's like a funny thing to kind of witness, because I feel like a lot of people have that experience.
Yeah, I'm going to write it down because I have two thoughts before I forget. I think with my family, which opens up like a whole other conversation, not even just about privilege, but like stigma, which all the work I do is stigma based. So it's funny to have it come full circle. But I think when I was in high school. So one, I was a bit younger, and I don't think my parents, they were like, how could you have all these problems, right? You live with us and we provide you food. How could you be sad or anxious about anything? And I think there is a bit of the shame of like, if you're depressed or if you're anxious, like that has to be my fault as a parent or thing. So I think it was internalized. And maybe I might have unintentionally, now thinking about it, spun it differently. But I think with ADHD, yes, like the first reaction, like I remember my mom being like, I don't think you have that. Like, you don't do X, Y, and Z. And I don't think she meant to minimize it. But again, her understanding was what mine was before I did all this research. Yeah. So I think that was a little bit helpful because I already had to do the work myself. So it didn't feel isolating. And I think to her credit, like she was receptive. And yeah, like I went back and I was like, but don't you remember, like I had kind of put it out of my mind. But again, like I went through all my report cards, and like everyone from 1st to 5th grade was like, talks too much, interrupts class, like all these things. And I think if you had seen me in high school or even like 8th grade and looked back at that, you wouldn't have thought it was the same person as I learned to deal with that. But the minimizing came up, but I think it was more of a lack of understanding. Whereas when I think it was depression and being medicated for that, I think that was internalized more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I want to ask, because I have friends who have told me that this is their experience, but like I think it's like maybe if your mom, if you were telling your mom like, hey, I think that I may have this because I do this one thing. Back to sorry, I'm jumping around. My friends who have ADHD have said that their cycle is very affected. So their symptoms like will sometimes be bad for like one symptom, maybe like pretty magnified for like 2 to maybe 1 week of the month, and then like may go away during other parts of their cycle when those hormones like balance back out. So I can imagine that like if you were again telling your mom like, hey, I think I have this thing because I do this a lot. If you only do it like for 1 month of your month or 1 week of your month, and then the other weeks you're better at it, it might be then minimized, as you were saying, as like, no, but you do it like fine for the other time, you know, like, but separate from that question, do you feel like your cycle is like affects some of the symptoms that you have experienced at all?
I think yes. It's something I've read about this too, and I've tried to pay more attention. It was more recent that I came across it. But I think I always was pretty good at realizing when my cycle was going to start, because like I was really, I don't even know if irritable is the word I want to use, but yeah, just like kind of crotchety. Everything annoyed me. And I hate the whole like, oh, you're being annoying, you must be like getting your period. And it's like, okay, no. But I started, especially as I got older, to notice those behavior changes, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're even more magnified because of ADHD. But I also think because a lot of my symptoms are like the way I think or like over talking, I think the things that I associate with my cycle, it's almost like the opposite. Like I get a little bit more quiet, a bit more reserved. Like I just want to be comfortable and like cozy and stuff like that. So yeah, I didn't even think about it, but yeah, it almost like flips in a way. But I don't know that. Yeah, I think there was just so much, like my mom and I have had to work on our relationship a lot. And I don't know that it's something she would have picked up on in terms of like my cycle, and or if it only, I think it was pretty constant behavior. But yeah, now I'm just going because that's really interesting. I haven't thought about it in that way yet. So that's cool.
So yeah, back to my Ryan and his ADHD diagnosis. We've had a lot of conversations about his ADHD and how that impacts our relationship and how it impacts like how we divide the household chores and stuff like that. And especially since we live together and I know you live with Ryan, that has brought up a lot of conversation. So I'm curious what your conversations with your Ryan look like in terms of like your ADHD, what that means for your relationship, living together, etc.
I do. I feel like the only way we figured out like knowing who's who is it's like your Ryan versus your Ryan.
Yeah, I was
versus
like,
mine.
your Ryan, my Ryan. I don't know.
So I love it. I didn't know that about your Ryan. I feel like now I want to sit down and like talk to him because also most of the people I've talked to have been women. So I think that's a whole interesting thing.
He kept being like, I'll come on the podcast this month. I'll come on. And I was like, Ryan, I think we're good on guests. And he's like, no, I'll talk about it. I will.
And it, right? Because like, and I think similar reaction to me, like if I had to guess, right, and it was like to bet money on it, I wouldn't have put money on Ryan having ADHD because it again,
if you lived with him, you would have.
That's fair. That's very fair.
Trust me.
That's valid. And well, so like even looking at relationships and like living in a household with someone, like I started to evaluate, which I haven't done enough. And I know Mallory, like you and I have talked a lot about it. And I think you've been there in like a very supportive and listening where you ask curious questions, but I haven't done enough of like asking other people about, I don't know if it's about symptoms, but like to pick up on things or like it has me reflecting a lot on my living situation before Ryan. Because my roommate at the time would point things out to me and I was like, I think I would internalize it and get upset. Like it was that I would get kind of distracted easily. Like I couldn't multitask. If I was on my phone, it would be frustrating for them. And I don't respond to texts. And I was like, I'm doing my best. Or like, I feel like that's not a problem. And now I'm just like very aware that it is. And like all those things are valid, but it was before I knew about it. So thinking back on that relationship and dynamic. But I think honestly, Ryan did the same thing. Like, before I knew it, there were things that rightfully so would frustrate him. Like our apartment would be a mess and I'd be like, all right, I'm going to clean today. And I still do this, but I always start in the same spot. And in our old apartment, it was like our area where all the books were.
Of course.
And
my
like,
favorite part of your apartment. Yeah.
The best. But like I would need to like like there would be food to vacuum on the floor, right? Or like messy things or like cleaning the bathroom sink. And like, I would be sitting there organizing my books and Ryan's like, Gabby, this isn't the priority. And I'm like, this is how it starts. I start in this corner and I go all the way around and like perfectionism tends, sorry if I think I hit the mic. Perfectionism tends to be a really big problem with ADHD, which is funny because like, it's like an all or nothing thing. So like I can live in complete chaos, like, but then if I'm going to do something like, I'm going to do it all the way, or I'll get distracted along the way. But like, that was the problem. Like I would exert 100% of energy and those books would look fabulous, but then I'd be like, all right, I need to go lay down now. And like, I don't have enough dopamine for this or whatever the problem was. And I didn't know that at the time. But yeah, as we started to like dissect stuff like that, and then I got the diagnosis, I was like, oh, Ryan, like, I'm sorry. Like, I get why that would be really frustrating. Now I think it's almost the opposite. Like once I clean a space, I'm like hyper fixated. And if Ryan like leaves something, I'm like, that's not in its spot. And like, we have to create smart systems because I have ADHD and like, you need to know what these systems are. And so it's like a whole, I think I have to imagine that once I got the diagnosis, like that month or two later, Ryan was like, wait a second, we went from like nothing to everything and I need some time to adjust. So some learning curves, but I think we've gotten a lot better at it. And I've gotten better at like explaining what I need because now I know what I need where before I really didn't. So yeah, living situations are interesting and I've been trying to reflect a lot on it.
I don't know why I'm imagining this, but I'm imagining like some doctor being like, all right, Gabby, here is your diagnosis. And because you do have a partner, we are obligated to prescribe your partner some CBD and THC ASAP because they're gonna need it.
Like I remember one of the arguments we had, and it was because like I think I was probably a little bit down just with the pandemic and being isolated, but I also think my ADHD symptoms were like really acting up. And it was so like, there would be times where like, he'd be like, Gabby, can you take the garbage out? And I was like, I can't. And he'd be like, what do you mean you can't? And I was like, I just can't get off the couch. I don't know how to describe this to you. You're also frustrating me right now. And there's like, what's the term? It's not object permanence. I don't know why that's coming into my head. But like someone tells you to do something and you're like, well, now because you told me, now I don't want to do it. Defiance, operational defiance, maybe. I don't know. I'm getting too
smart.
murky.
Yeah.
Basically it made me mad. And like that can contribute to ADHD. But yeah, then it was like everything was clean, everything had a place. Ryan left his shoes somewhere and I freaked out. And I think that would have benefited him to have gotten like, Gabby, here's your prescription, and Ryan, here's one for you.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a time that you'll figure it out.
I'm having a lot of light bulb moments in this episode about Ryan, my Ryan.
I was gonna say which one.
Yeah, because like even the other day, so Ryan gets hyper fixated on the kitchen. That's like the thing that he will clean it so thoroughly where like I would never clean it as thoroughly as him. But his thing is like after he cleans it, he doesn't want to use the kitchen for the rest of the day because it's like he like perceives that he spent so much time cleaning every like square inch of the kitchen. He's like, we're just getting takeout tonight and we're going to make smoothies for breakfast, and for lunch tomorrow we're going to go out. And I'm like, Ryan, we can't, like, every time you clean the kitchen, we can't just like not use the kitchen for like 5 days.
Tell Ryan the solution is just to never clean the kitchen. I've gotten really good at that.
So funny. Ryan keeps yelling at me, but anyway, that just like had a light bulb moment because I think he has that same kind of intensity and then almost like protection over the spaces that he cleans. So that's so funny.
Well, because it is, and like something I've gotten better at is like I would just have perpetual to-do lists where like it wasn't like I was adding something new every time. It was the same things. And so once I'm able to complete it, then as soon as there's a problem, I would get really upset because I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to have that energy again, but like I finally did this thing that just made me feel so bad for not doing for so long. And it's almost like I need you to respect it and I need you to and then I like really turn it inward and I'm like, do you not value me? And there was a lot of times where it was like, what? And we had to take a step back. So but I validate Ryan and that's very fair.
Oh, I have something to share, and it is kind of like a bit of a change of topic, but I feel like this is a safe and comfy group to share this with. And so I would just love everyone's opinion or if they've ever felt this way. I feel like I've hinted at some of this in past podcasts and our last podcast specifically, but there is kind of this thing that I have, and I don't know if any of you guys have experienced it, where I am very, very scared to let someone, whether it be like a friend or a partner or a doctor or whatever it might be, see the whole entirety of how my brain functions, because I literally think that it's scary time sometimes in terms of like the whole truth of like things that I do or ways that I've coped or certain behaviors that I have. And I feel like I've started to be a little bit more open about it in the last few years of just like, and I kind of joke sometimes like my brain is like a world in itself, like how it operates. But I don't know, it feels like a very vulnerable and exposing thing for me to even like approach a doctor, because I'm scared that I would walk home with 4 diagnoses, however you say it. And not that I feel stigma about the diagnosis in particular, because I feel like I have a pretty solid idea of like areas that might light up on those tests, but it just feels like I don't want to be someone who has multiple things or is like carrying this weight. And even my therapist, I've like, I don't know. One thing I am being a little more open about too is like how, and now Lara, you guys can comment on this too, but I am like a pretty good hider of things. And I've always been a very good hider of things. And I'm very good at like packaging it into a vulnerable seeming package that actually, in fact, is only 30% of that package. And I don't know, it's kind of manipulative. And I think it's something that I can unfortunately tap into quite easily. But I don't know, that whole thing is my, rambly comment on the fear that I have.
I think two things, Ken. The first one was like, I think that this kind of our generation is really trying hard to make it, I guess, more normalized to learn about yourself and get these diagnoses and get the help that like is custom made for you. But I do think that we are not yet, like, we are accepting of the tip of the iceberg. Whereas before it was like no iceberg accepted. Like you're just hysterical because you're a female. Like that was the accepted
the
thing.
Wandering room.
Right. You're just like a witch. Like we're going to burn you. But then it's like, okay, we're accepting of the tip of the iceberg, but we're not yet comfortable with the idea of going to a doctor and getting 6 diagnoses. It's like, I can handle 2 max, maybe.
Yeah.
Like that is acceptable right now.
Yeah. And also even, I mean, speaking of witch stuff, it's like, and going to a doctor and being like, and also this other thing that I do,
I hear
that you don't believe in.
Yeah.
How would you put that on your chart? Let me ask.
Yeah. Where do I go?
Yeah.
Do you take me somewhere? Because I don't want that. But I don't think I am feeling that in terms of like talking to doctors about my mind, but I have like, it is a scary place to be in a relationship with someone and be like, hey, I know that this is like not, it is nonsensical, but here is what my brain just did. Like, let me walk you through it. That is very vulnerable.
Yeah.
I am asking Ryan a question to see if I can share like more deeply about some of the stuff we've gone through, because I think it touches on it. But I mean, yeah, I think that was a great, like, growing up, we didn't have all these people, and I've found so much validation in going online and seeing people that look or behave, their home looks the way mine looks, so they behave the way that I do. And I also feel like, yeah, when I was doing research, I was like, is it ADHD? Is it autism? I think there's something about like, it can be validating to get a term and to know there's something and there's ways to navigate it. But having multiple, it's like, well, I feel like I'm in the same situation I was in before. Like, what do I even do now? What part of this is this thing versus that thing? So I think one, it can be overwhelming. And I think it's, I don't know how you meant it, but I want to challenge manipulating, because like, you're also just trying to navigate it for yourself and to be seen and to be heard and also like be accepted. And I think it's more like masking than manipulating, because you're not, I don't think you would choose to have that battle in your head, you know, and I'm projecting a bit. I know I wouldn't. But
no,
yeah,
that's a good point.
That's, I think that's scary. Vulnerability is always scary. That feels very Brene Brown, but yeah.
Yeah, we love Brene Brown here, so that's okay.
Yeah.
I think my only like other thought, and thank you for sharing, McKenna, is I've been thinking, well, we talk about labels so much on the podcast, but I feel like we haven't talked about it a lot, just the power of labels and deciding what labels feel like they fit. And the idea of getting 6 diagnoses, it's like, I think you just have to weight the labels that like feel most aligned to you. Like for, you may get 6 diagnoses and really only feel like 2 of them really like feel like things that you're dealing with every day, versus the other 4 might be things that come up when there's traumatic situations or like at heightened states, etc. So I think it's also like the weight you put on the labels and identifying with them as much or as little as you want.
Yeah, that's so true, because you do have to meet, to get a diagnosis or a label, most of the times you have to meet a specific set of criteria, like Gabby was talking about earlier. And it kind of messes with your brain if you're someone who has taken a lot of like, non-doctor approved quizzes about multiple things.
BuzzFeed.
And you're, and you're hitting like 70 to 80%, like you probably have tendencies of these things. It's like, well, then at that point, what do you do too? If like, you're kind of in limbo because you're like, oh, I have OCD tendencies, or I have this tendency, or I rank really high on this test, but not enough to get me a formal diagnosis. Like that also is so weird because your brain it's not like brains understand those tests and are like, oh, we're just going to cut this off. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of a funky space, I think.
It's also funky because I'm imagining like, say you get just like, could be 6 diagnoses, could be 2 diagnoses. Like I'm diagnosed with A and I'm diagnosed with B. I'm imagining like a Venn diagram where like now you have A and B, you've created a C. So imagine doing that 6 times, like to the 6th power. Like you've got a whole lot of things going on.
Yeah.
But then, I
that
mean,
shift with your life, like Mal said.
Yeah. But I mean, I think even of like the example of, and we talked about this on the last episode, like the example of getting diagnosed with an eating disorder, right? Like there are so many things that overlap with anxiety, depression, ADHD, OCD, like overlap with an eating disorder. Probably same with a substance use disorder. Like there is so much overlap between those. So even if you did get diagnosed with 6, like they may all appear relatively similar as a person. So, I mean, to Gabby's point earlier, like I think you can be diagnosed with something, but then the real question is like, well, what do I actually do about it? Because it's like, you know, you can have something, but then be like, cool, it's really great to know that I have this thing, but like, what do I do about it? Which is me with every medical diagnosis I get. So yeah, I think that's the action part is oftentimes the challenging part too.
Yeah. And like, I remember going through all of this, and I think, the same fears and stuff, but acknowledging one, like the fact that I had access to this and like could get a label was definitely a privilege. And I think it was something I pursued because I knew about medication and how that could help me. But there's the way it crosses over, like people with ADHD can tend to have higher rates of substance use, and OCD plays a factor, and depression, anxiety, like all of these things. And I think I've tried to focus it as like, the label can be really good, but what we really should take away from this is meeting people where they're at, because even someone who doesn't have ADHD or anything else, like could struggle in school trying to read something the same way I would. And so like, is there a different way that we can approach this? And like, that doesn't have to mean like medication. Like even for me, there were things behaviorally I needed to do or adjust. And I was really trying to fit myself in the box that people told me I needed to be in. And I was like, it's fine if my shape is a circle and I do things differently. And I don't think I would have thought through that, honestly, if not for COVID and for ADHD. Like, I think, I forget who said it, but even talking about like being able to work remotely and you can do the things you need to do. Like, I'm really fortunate in that I have a job that is not only fully remote, but like my boss and my team are super supportive. Like there's multiple times where on a random weekday, like I've just completely shut down and I can't make myself do something, but like I'll stay on later or I'll do work on a Saturday because like I know I have that flexibility, and it in a weird way, it's a really great work-life balance. Instead of just like forcing myself to do the 9 to 5 and to do what I have to do and all these things. So it can be scary, but I think trying to just be like, everyone's different and that's cool, and we should all just be cool with that. I feel like that's the moral of what I try to live life by, and not everyone agrees, which is annoying, but you know.
I love that. Any additions? I feel like that's a great ending point.
Wow.
My final question is just, is there anything that we didn't ask or didn't touch on that you wish people knew about ADHD or your experience with ADHD, or any like final pieces of advice that you would give people going through the journey that you went through?
Yeah. Wow. Great question. I mean, firstly, I think having people to talk to, whether that's someone you trust in your family, regardless of their connection to what you have, or like, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're like, I identify with some of that, like you can also feel free to reach out to me. I think talking with people is really important. And again, meeting them where they're at. But I think, like also just giving and affording everyone grace. Like looking back at my life, the people who did that were the people that I was most, I don't want to say functional around, but also, yeah. And I wouldn't have been able to articulate it was ADHD at the time, but like just by being open to maybe me being different or just being patient with me, that was really helpful. I'm trying to think if there was anything that we didn't touch on. Yeah, I think, you know, being open to whatever works for you. It's okay if you want to use medication. It's okay if you don't. I can share like some links and some recommendations. Like the book that I've been working through has been really helpful, so I'll send those after. But yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think if there's anything we didn't talk about. I think this was a good round, wholesome conversation.
Wholesome.
I wish we could talk to you every month, Gabby. Do you wanna?
Gabby.
I mean, yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Podcast or otherwise.
Okay.
I do have ADHD and I'm bad at scheduling, but if you put it on my calendar, I'm there. So,
okay, cool.
Well, we are going to hang out in June, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Obviously, I'm like, what's in June? And I was like, I have so many things going on. Yes, in June we will for sure hang out. Which is, it's going to be a highlighting, lovely summer of all three of you. So I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yay! Gabby, you're the absolute best.
Yeah, we love you.
You're
Thank
the
you so much
best.
for coming on and sharing all about what you have gone through and being just a bright little light as always.
Oh, ditto. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Have a good week.
Bye.